Kia ora and hello. Welcome to our virtual discussion on the feature, Ever the Land. My name is Carlton Eley, and I am the Senior Director for Federal Strategies with Race Forward. The mission of Race Forward is to catalyze movement building for racial justice in partnership with communities, organizations, and sectors. We build strategies to advance racial justice in our policies, institutions, and culture. Race Forward is a supporting sponsor for the Environmental Film Festival in the nation's capital. We want to thank the film festival organizers for inviting us to guest curate this feature, which includes themes on equity and the built environment. Ever the Land was initially screened at the Environmental Film Festival in 2015. Today, we want to revisit the feature with a couple of guests. Today, we're pleased to have Sarah Grohnert. Sarah is the filmmaker who brought Ever the Land to the screen. She is a director and editor with a strong sense of visual storytelling, and she possesses the ability to bring an endless amount of patience and curiosity to her projects. Sarah is a New Zealand resident, and Ever the Land is her award-winning debut feature documentary. We're also pleased to have Rafael DeLeon. Rafael is a U.S. civil servant. He's employed by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and his career with the agency spans 35 years. Rafael is a member of the Senior Executive Service, and he currently serves as the Principal Deputy Assistant Administrator of the Office of International and Tribal Affairs. Rafael is a graduate of Georgetown University School of Law in Washington, D.C. And finally, I want to acknowledge that Kirsty Luke, Chief Executive of the Tūhoe Tribal Authority, is unable to join us today. Aotearoa, New Zealand was impacted by a cyclone just last week. As a result, Kirsty is focusing on emergency management interventions at the moment. We send Kirsty and the members of Tūhoe our greetings, and we hope the recovery process is swift. As we start today's brief discussion on Ever the Land, I want to first turn to Sarah. And Sarah, I just want to say congratulations for releasing this beautiful film in 2015 and adjusting your schedule so that you can accommodate a conversation about it for the Environmental Film Festival in 2023.
My pleasure. Thank you, Carlton.
You're welcome. Ever the Land is an observational documentary. And as the filmmaker, you essentially served as a third-party observer to the process. Did you envision this feature unfolding in this manner when you started the project? And as a follow-up question, when did you decide that the best narrator would actually be a blend of what the camera captured as well as your editing process?
So I guess the context to that is, and you mentioned I'm a New Zealand resident, but I'm originally from Germany. So I started this project around 2011. I'd been in the country in New Zealand for about a year. I'd started making a few connections and sort of venturing out, looking for projects. And I was very interested in finding a project to do with sustainability, and we were kind of researching together with my producer Alexander Beasy into architecture and the built environment and what that meant at the time for New Zealand. And it was kind of, one of those coincidences and meeting the right people at the right time that I was introduced to the architectural firm that at the time was working with Tūhoe. And we talked to, I didn't know anything about Tūhoe at the time. I was still, learning about the history and meeting, and particularly sort of in a city like Auckland, the big city, it's sort of hard to get a grasp of really what's happening out in the country, and sort of familiarize yourself with the stories that happen there and the history. So I guess we sort of were introduced to Tūhoe by the architects, and what spoke to me really was initially that concept of the living building challenge. There was a wonderful man at the company called JazzMax who oversaw the project. His name is Jerome Partington, and he spoke so full of life and enthusiasm about this living building challenge, being able to introduce that and hopefully marry that with Tūhoe's vision of how to live with the land and build in the land. that, you know, as a filmmaker, it just kind of sparked something and ignited something in me that I wanted to know more about. So I guess initially I thought I was going to make a film about just the building and about the architecture. And when I went there for the first time, I just got an entirely different, you know, feel of the place. It's so unique and so special, and people romanticize and talk about, you know, people's connection with land, but when you're there, you feel it. And I was like, oh, okay, you know, how do I capture that? How do I make that felt for an audience? And how do I bring in all the other layers that are part and parcel of the story that I can see unfolding here? And it was a constant learning process for me as well. At life, I'd say I knew exactly what I was doing. Most of the time I felt I didn't. I just kind of became a recordist, I think, more than, you know, like here's the formula and here's what I want to do. And I let the stories of the people inform what the film needed to be. So yeah, with that sense, in terms of it, you know, becoming wider and becoming more layered, and obviously understanding about the history and the point of history where Tūhoe were at the time, with the settlement of the relationship with the government and all that kind of flows into it, that unfolded as I got there. What I did know about from the beginning is that I did not want to have interviews or make it about very specific people or subjects or individuals. I know there's some people in the film that feature more than others by virtue of their role within the tribe. You mentioned Kirsty Luke, you know, she has a beautiful ability to articulate, and I thought that was very important to weave into the film to give context. But otherwise, I thought it was about letting the people speak for themselves, not with formulated or preempted questions that would lead in a way that I might like it to sound, but to kind of just spend a lot of time on the ground, record as much as I can. And that, you know, from then obviously comes the process of what do you select, what do you keep in, what do you keep out. So this, you know, as an editor, you still make choices, conscious choices about what you leave in and what you take out. So in that way it is, you know, narrated or edited, but as much as possible, I wanted the film to be an experience of the place and the people. And that's the way it allowed me to do that.
Sarah, thank you for explaining that you wanted the feature to be an experience. And I think it is for a number of different audiences. If you are an architect and you're into urban design and green building, there's something in it for you. If you follow issues of reparatory justice, then there is something in it for you as a member of the audience. Or if you like to follow issues of tribal sovereignty and self-determination, you will find it in this feature. Clearly, Tūhoe was approaching an inflection point in the documentary. Can you offer some context for the benefit of the audience and reconnect it to the construction project that is central to this documentary?
Yeah, I mentioned before that Tūhoe, at the time of beginning with the construction of the building, we're at a point in the history where there were had been negotiations with the government for, I think, at least a decade. And there's a process in New Zealand that was set up in the mid-70s that is called the Waitangi Tribunal. It's sort of a permanent commission that looks into, makes recommendations and looks into claims that have been brought forward by Māori tribes as far as kind of breaches of the Treaty of Waitangi, which is the founding document and the controversial agreement, I suppose, between the Europeans that came in and the Māori tribes at the time, you know, agreeing how their living together would look like, and on which the New Zealand Constitution government is founded. So they were in negotiations about taking forward claims around, land, you know, that had been taken, particularly the place called Te Uru, which is the homelands of Tūhoe, and which feature in the film, and you'll hear the government address that and speak an apology. So all this was unfolding sort of around the time when I entered the scene, and we didn't know what the time frame was, whether or not that would come to a close during the time of the construction, and it was very fortuitous that it did. because I suppose, well, with or without the settlement, Tūhoe were at a point where they made the decision as a tribe, or as an iwi, as they call it over here, to come up with a blueprint, what do the next 40 or 50 years look like? And the thing that's very at the forefront of their mind is, what does cultural permanency look like? Like, how do we remain Tūhoe within an ever-changing world? How do we retain our language, our customs, our culture, but we bring our people back also that have left overseas or live in cities? And I think there's a point in the film where Kirsty Luke talks in a meeting to, what does this thing of sustainability look like? Well, it has to do with people, but how do you bring back people? You need to start with infrastructure. You need to, develop and bring resources back into the community that, allow to build, but build in a way that suits us and our idea and vision that's unfolding and developing about cultural permanency. So at that point, it kind of came back in, and that's what, all roads in the film kind of lead back to the building. It's become, and it was always designed, I suppose, in a way, as a beacon of hope, as a landmark of a change, of bringing together the past, the present, and the future, in one place, through materials, through the way it attracts people, the way people interact with the building, the way it's a gateway to the land, the way it holds and captures stories. So yeah, that's, that all kind of has become this multi-layered film. And I acknowledge some people find it frustrating because they want to know much more about the architecture, or they want to have much more detail, maybe about the historical side of things. But again, that brings it back to my desire to make it an experience, rather than sort of an in-depth one look at sort of intellectually taking apart one element of it. I think it's things are always more complex, everything's made up of different parts, and I really wanted to show that complexity, and again make it felt, and then ruminate on that and see, okay, take it home with you. What does it mean? What does it mean for you, and the places you live?
Thank you, Sarah. I want to turn to Rafael. And Sarah, as a transition point, I want to acknowledge that when you started working on the project, you came to the realization that you wanted the people to speak for themselves. In the United States, there's the environmental justice movement, where it's often emphasized that we speak for ourselves, in the sense of understanding the importance of the self-determination of persons who may be impacted by any number of different externalities that may be overwhelming them. Rafael, you work at the intersection of international and tribal affairs within a federal agency that's taking an assertive position to address climate change. And you're one of the EPA managers who has developed an equity lens that informs how you view your work. Can you share what resonated with you while watching this documentary?
Sure, and thank you, Carlton. Hello, everybody. Carlton, thank you for the invitation to serve on this panel. And Sarah, it is an honor to be here with you. Thank you so much. You provided so much context. Before I start, Carlton, you mentioned I'm a civil servant, so I need to share that the views and opinions that I express are mine alone and do not represent the position or the policy of EPA or the US government. But having said that, the three things that resonated with me are the following. Number one, the relationship of the tribe to the crown and the long-term relationship that the tribe has with the land or the national park that Sarah mentioned, and how that came full circle from the 1920s to the end of the film. It raptured for me. I was so enthralled with the sort of history of how the tribe and the relationship, they were pushed off this land and not given anything to do generally after the 1920s, and then how it's come full circle towards the end. So that just captivated my attention. Second, the film opens with a tribal leader engaging the community, much like we do in our work here at EPA, and that at the meeting, he was seeking input and concurrence and feedback on the project. And to me, this is an example of a community-driven solution that has many parallels here in the States, with public hearings or public engagement sessions in our environmental justice work. And then the third thing that resonated with me was the theme of sustainability. And Sarah, you mentioned that also early in your comments. So early in the film, it was clear to me that one of the goals was to ensure that the building had no environmental impact. And I thought that was such a wonderful goal. This is demonstrated by the discussion around the desire to eliminate any red list materials. And I wasn't sure what red list materials were, but I pretty much got an idea that they either toxic or bad for the environment or not recyclable and not sustainable. But it was, I think, a great message to start with, that we were not going to use, or the tribe was not going to use any red list materials in the construction of the building, and as well as some glues. We have some history of glues being used on carpets here and off-gassing and making people sick. So I think the issue of not using glues was also resonating with me. I thought this was an excellent example of environmental stewardship and environmental leadership. Those would be the three things that resonated with me off the bat.
Thank you, Rafael. Sarah, I want to turn back to you, and I will preface my remarks by acknowledging Octavia Butler, who's an American writer. And she once said that all that you touch, you change. And all that you change, changes you. And we kind of talked about this at the start of our remarks. I was in New Zealand for roughly about 6 months in 2003, and it definitely left an imprint on me. What I wanted to ask you is that it's been 8 years since this film project was wrapped up. This feature and the narrative that you've had the opportunity to introduce has been shared with many audiences. And so what I wanted to ask is, what mark did this experience of working on the documentary, of working with Tūhoe, of working with Kirsty Luke actually leave with you? What impression did it actually leave with you in terms of having the opportunity to do this?
Very good question, and very hard to put into words, the answer. But I think, you know, I talked before about the unique experience of being there and kind of really understanding kind of in my mind, in my heart, in my body, kind of what it means when people have a real sense of belonging. And there's a term in the Māori language called tūranga waiwai, which means your place to stand. And another word that they use, which is called, and I'm aware it sounds in English slightly off, but it's called whakapapa. And it means like the sort of ancestral connection. Everyone, you know, knows their family history like generations back. And I think when I got there, one of the first things I sort of noticed immersing myself in that and really understanding the importance also that your relation is not just kind of to, you know, not just from my point of view, it was like, oh, it's knowing your family, it's knowing your ancestors, but your ancestors is also, you know, it's also the land. And it's, you know, is this ridge over there, and it's that mountain over there, and it's that river over there. And it's not just a concept anymore. It's like, it's real. And those things really, really impressed me. And I guess sort of offset like an ongoing process with me. Well, what does that mean for me, for someone? And I feel possibly a lot of people in the world that we live in are in a similar situation where you've chosen to emigrate somewhere else, or, you know, even the way we move around cities within, you know, our own country and make a new home. Like, yeah, this question of belonging and investigating and what that means and bringing that back to a place and a land and somewhere to stand, that has been big for me. And I mean, over and beyond that, I've made so many beautiful connections with the Tūhoe people. I mean, my process of filming, that might be interesting to know, I sort of spent on and off 2.5, 3 years on the ground, where I'd go there and drive there and spend a week or 2 weeks at a time. And over time got, you know, literally just kind of scouting and like driving into the different valleys. It's a very remote area, and like their tribal area is very distinct actually, and separate from each other, like all the different valleys, which is another reason why the building held such significance, because finally there's one place where all the different valleys can come together, you know, and as a meeting place. And yeah, just being able to sustain those connections and learn from them, as well as having that exchange, has been really, really eye-opening.
Thank you, Sarah. That was beautiful. And thank you for reminding us about the concept of whakapapa, which is genealogy, and how that concept isn't just about your physical lineage, but also about the river you connect to, the mountain you connect to, and the land that you're connected to as well. I'm going to ask two more questions, and I'll go back and forth between Rafael and Sarah, but we want to make sure we wrap this up neatly. Rafael, my question for you is, Ever the Land takes a close look at justice, self-determination, and community-driven development. From your vantage point, what environmental projects would you shortlist in the United States because they possess a similar narrative and attributes, as well as results that are equally compelling to the feature that you had the opportunity to review?
Well, thank you for the question, Carlton. The themes of justice, self-determination, and community-driven solution do have similar narratives here in the United States, especially in those communities that have traditionally been overburdened with pollution and underserved when it comes to environmental protection. A few projects that I would shortlist that have a similar narrative with compelling results are the following. There is a project in the state of South Carolina called the Regenesis Project. This community had a number of distressed, abandoned, contaminated properties. A number of local, state, and federal leaders came together and through their collaborative efforts, led a community-driven plan to revitalize their community. The results have been nothing but impressive. Starting with a modest $25,000 grant, the community has been able to leverage that seed money into a state-of-the-art health center, a $6.1 million green recreation center, and a much-needed food shopping center. In total, over the course of about 20 years or so, approximately $300 million have been invested in this community, resulting from those collaborative efforts. Another example that I would share is a project in one of our indigenous communities, the Owingeh Pueblo in New Mexico. In fact, that project shares some striking similarities with this project. In that case, the tribal authority and the community worked closely together with an architect to achieve the goals of the tribes to restore adobe buildings that were culturally significant to the tribe. Some of the similarities were the collaborative process that was used to seek community input, the passion and dedication to the project, and the fact that it was not just about a structure or a home, but these buildings represented acts of self-determination and cultural preservation. So I was struck by the similarities, Sarah, with that project and the one that you worked on. So thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you, Rafael. This will be our last question for this guest curation. And Sarah, I will wrap up with you. Very briefly, what advice would you give to young filmmakers who aspire to capture stories that are at the intersection of equity in the built environment?
Oh, I don't know if there's a formula to it. I mean, I made one film that happened to turn out to be at that intersection. Not that I was aware of it when I started. But I mean, I just give advice as a documentary filmmaker. The most important thing I've learned, and I suppose it speaks to the approach that I've taken, is just be a good listener. I think you and be prepared to to change what you think the film is about. Let it really be informed by what comes back. Obviously have a plan and know your subject. And I think there's sort of sometimes it's great to research deeply into it before you go into it. I have to say, I think it was my advantage that I was fresh in the country, so to speak, that I had an outsider's point of view, that I didn't yet know too much about the history that was kind of, I guess, written from a New Zealander's point of view. So I got to really learn the story from the inside out and heard the story from the Tūhoe people. So I feel, if people are approaching these kind of projects with that subject or anything similar, yeah, make sure that you're in a good listening space, and enjoy the ride, you know. And I also just really want to acknowledge, thank you so much for rescreening the film and putting it on. It's really joyful to hear you both speak to the film so beautifully and draw the parallels. I'm really heartwarmed that, you know, 8 years on, the film still gives and goes, and I have hopes that it will continue to do so. And I want to acknowledge the festival for putting on this panel and everyone involved for organizing it. And Rafael, thank you very much also for taking the time and making the time in your schedule, and Carlton for, you know, wrapping it all up so beautifully and giving us all your thoughtful and beautiful questions. Thank you.
Oh, no, thank you, Sarah. On behalf of Race Forward, who is a supporting sponsor, I want to thank Sarah Grohnert, as well as Rafael DeLeon of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, for taking the time to participate in today's guest curation on Ever the Land. Thank you for this conversation about stewardship and equity and the built environment. Sarah, I was deeply moved when I had the opportunity to see the film in 2015 at the Smithsonian National History Museum. I added visiting this site to my bucket list, and I'm pleased to say that I had the opportunity to visit in 2017. If there's anyone else that I could thank today, I also want to thank Fulbright New Zealand, because in 2003, I participated in the Ian Axford New Zealand Fellowship in Public Policy, and New Zealand definitely rubbed off on me based on having the opportunity to work and engage and meet so many wonderful people over the span of about 6 months. This is the conclusion of our guest curation. We want to remind you that the DC Environmental Film Festival will be in Washington, DC, March 16 through 26. And the website address is www.dceff.org. And if you are interested in visiting the website for Race Forward, it is www.raceforward.org. Thank you very much for being with us today, and we hope that you have a wonderful day.